sufficiency, in your omnipotence, we find courage. In your omniscience, we find wisdom. In your omnipresence, we will never be alone. Amen. And with this and many other exhortations, he preached the good news to the people. Good news. He just called them snakes, but it's good news. Instead, it's going to be burned in unquenchable fire. Right? That's good news. It's hard to reconcile, I know. It's hard because he's speaking in a prophetic language. He's speaking as the last of the prophets to be on this earth, starting all the way back with Elijah and culminating with John the Baptist, who is seen to be Elijah again. He is the end of that prophetic movement that was part of Israel. And there had been a 400-year breach between Malachi and John the Baptist. And yet he says some very hard words, just like all the prophets do. And he did this characteristic exhortation of the people, saying things that no one wants to hear. So today we're going to look at the power of exhortation. We are going to look at the practical wisdom of John the Baptist. And finally, we are going to look at the whole of the gospel. That whole is still good news, even when someone says that there's some bad news in it as well. When John said, "You brood of vipers," in Luke's gospel, which we read today, he says it to the entire crowd. If you go back to Matthew's gospel a couple years ago, when we went through it in Matthew chapter 3, very similar to Luke, he comes out and it says the Sadducees and the Pharisees came to see the crowds that were there with John. John looks at them, these religious elders, these powerful men in the religion of ancient Israel, and said, "You brood of vipers." And it's like he's calling out to them, saying they're the snakes. But in Luke's gospel, he gives it to everybody. So it's like they come, he starts screaming at them, and then he sees all these other people and he gets to scream at. He does that as well. And it's a little crazy. Because he's saying that you all are like poisonous snakes. Now that should remind us of something. And many of us, although I'm not going to say that all of us have read the Bible all the way through, most of us have probably gotten to Genesis chapter 3. Right? That's the third chapter. Most of us have gotten there, and we remember this story that had this serpent who came up to Adam and Eve and said, "Can you really not eat of that apple?" Eve says, even Adam said, "No, we can't even touch it." He says, "Surely you will not die. You will be like gods yourselves." And that is what John the Baptist is likening all of the people who came to see him. He's saying that our great struggle as humanity, who is made in the image of God, is that we think that we're not the image of God, but we're God himself. And that we act as though we are God regularly, and we lead people astray. So much so, as I said a few weeks back, I said if aliens came down to earth and said, "We have finally found in humanity the image of God," and they saw all of what we're doing, all of the terrors of the world, all of the tragedy, and the sickness and the famine, and it's just people left alone to die in this world, they would say, if that's what God is like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. And what the prophets say is that's not what God is like. And the problem is that we don't recognize what God is like anymore because humanity isn't living as though we're human beings anymore, but rather we have lost touch with who we really are. And we're leading people away from the God who created them. And it's the great struggle that we have over and over and over again. And that's why we need the bad news of exhortation. That's why we need to be called out regularly. That's why we need to struggle with this. It's because we need to hear that bad news. Because if Jesus is only this very loving person, if God's love is only similar to, say, what Mr. Rogers is like, then we're not being changed very much. Then we're not being called into the new life that God has provided for us. And we need that exhortation. he says to do. Look at the practical wisdom that he gives to people who come to him. Okay, I guess I'm a snake, right? Whatever. But what are you going to have me do? What do you want me to do? And this is the normal person. What does he say? He doesn't say fast for 40 days and try your hardest not to drink water. And maybe then you'll have some strange, famished vision of what God is like. He said, you got 2 coats? Give one to some other guy. Some guy who needs your help. You got more food than you need? Give some to those people who don't have enough. Recognize all that you have and all that you need, and the surplus that you have, help another person out. I see that all the time in this parish. I see people like you every day doing stuff like that. Not just for me, but for all kinds of people. The tax collectors come too, recognizing that they're sinners, come up to John the Baptist, what about me? Am I going to be taking part, or are you going to say that I'm worthless just like the Pharisees and the Sadducees have said? Are you going to say that I have no place in the kingdom of God, and that God's coming to eradicate me? Am I the tree that's going to be cut down? Am I the chaff that will be burned in an unquenchable fire? Is that me? Because everybody else has told me that. Tax collectors came to collect taxes. And what they did is that they came, and the only way in which they made any money is by adding to what people owed on their taxes. They said, well, we owe $100, but I got to get paid, so you're going to pay me $150, and that's what you really owe the Roman government. Because I'm part of the government, and if you don't pay it, bad things are going to happen to you. John says, collect only what you have to collect. Immediately, the tax collector is saying, well, I can't survive. And I can hear John saying, maybe you should get a different job. Roman soldiers came to him. Roman soldiers. These were Jewish tax collectors. These are people who are Gentiles. These are people who can't participate in the religion of ancient Israel. These are people who can't even get very close to the temple. They are in the outer courts, right? These are Roman soldiers. These are also the people who are exploiting the majority of people around them like thugs. Using the power and training that they had to make money for themselves, to bring people who disagree with them under false accusation and cart them off to prison. These are what people are like. At the end of the day, they come up to John and say, what about me? He says, stop abusing people. You're here to protect people. Stop exploiting those around you with the power that you have. And just be with the people you are here to protect. And recognize that they will love you for doing that. It's really simple, practical wisdom that he gives to folks. The problem is that we struggle to do that regularly. The practical stuff. The very easy stuff. The basics. And the point is that we need that exhortation to get us back on track sometimes. Not because God doesn't love us. Not because God actually has, a lot of wrath in store for us or anything like that. But because when we act against what God has created us to be, when we stop acting like human beings, we create a society that is more like a pride of lions or a violent beast, a pack of wild dogs, rather than what God has created us to be. And the reality is that it's only through God's love that anything changes. We can make a checklist for our lives, try and make sure that we do all the right things. But the reality is that the only emancipatory quality that is out there is the love of God. The only thing that gets us back on track to realize that we've missed the boat so far is that we are absolutely loved just as we are. And it's that love that changes us, that makes us different from the world around us. It's that love that gives us hope in the midst of a world that says, I can fix it if I just cut out these people who don't act like me. The reality is that God says, yes, it's true. We are broken. We make horrible mistakes that hurt people. And here's the truth. It's those mistakes do not eclipse the love that I have for you. You might be acting like poisonous snakes. I absolutely love you. I'm coming for you. I'm coming for each and every one of you. And I will train you how to be like the Son of Man my son was. That's what we get. And that's the preparation that John the Baptist gave to the world. As he prepared them to see the Messiah, not as one coming from the clouds, but one who was in their midst already. Who was hanging out with the sinners at the River Jordan, waiting to be baptized. And he shows up, and John the Baptist says, "Here's the guy. The one whose thongs I'm not able to even untie. Whose sandals I'm not even to be around. Who's there that I can't even be a part of. And yet I'm going to baptize him. Not because he needs it, but because he wants to be seen with you." The temptation we have in our lives is that we think we have to get it all together before God gets here. And the other temptation is that we think that nothing matters anymore. And we ride between those two poles, being either perfectionists or nihilists, right? And the reality is it's in the middle. Is if we're going to understand the whole of the gospel, the whole good news, is it has to be for all humanity, in all of our violence, in all of our brokenness, in all of our joy, in all of our triumphs, in all the ways in which we cured polio and left people to die. It has to encompass all of us and every part of us. And God's love has done that. And has said, I want each and every one of you. I want the whole thing. That starts with you. We have to hear the exhortation. We have to hear the bad news just as much as we have to hear the good news. That's why Luke has the audacity to write with this and other things, and other exhortations. He preached the good news to the people who were there. That's all we got. This is it. This is the gospel. The gospel is in us and all of our glory, in us and all of our pain, in us in all the ways that we have hurt people. God says,